Hello and welcome to this presentation on virtualization licensing, looking at virtualization scenarios including server virtualization, VDA, MedV and AppV. My name is Vicky Lee and I'll be taking you through this presentation today. During this presentation we're going to take a quick look at the different areas covered by Microsoft Virtualization. Then we will focus on the virtualization and licensing of Windows Server, Windows Desktop and the desktop applications. Microsoft Virtualization runs from the data center to the desktop, with technologies to enable server virtualization and desktop virtualization. But when you are virtualizing, managing that infrastructure is very important. However, today we will be concentrating just on the areas of server and desktop virtualization. Do feel free to check out our management and security presentation if you wish to learn about the management tools. The first area we're going to look at is that of server virtualization and looking at virtualizing utilizing Windows Server. Here we have a physical server, and that physical server would need to have an operating system installed on it in the form of Windows Server 2008 R2. Today we are just concentrating on the main editions in the form of the Standard, Enterprise and Data Center edition. As well as an operating system, that server would also have applications installed on it, and our example here today is Exchange Server. Now, Windows and Exchange Server are installed at the moment on the physical server in the physical operating system environment. But what we're really thinking about here is virtualization. So I'm just going to ignore Exchange Server for a moment. Now, one of the technologies of Windows Server is Hyper-V, and Hyper-V is our virtualization tool, so it allows us to create our virtual servers. Those virtual servers would all need to run their own operating system and their own sets of applications. And those operating systems and applications are running in a virtual operating system environment, or what we would call a VOS. Wherever you see a logo, you would need to have a license, and that's what we're going to look at now. The different editions of Windows Server come with different rights with regard to virtualization. So let's take away all of those flags at the moment, and first of all we're going to look at the licensing of Windows Server Standard Edition. Now, Windows Server Standard Edition allows you to run applications in one operating system environment. That might be the physical operating system environment, as we can currently see, or it could be in one virtual operating system environment. If you are running in the virtual environment, then you are allowed to run Windows Server on the physical server purely there to manage that virtual machine. When we think about the Enterprise edition of Windows Server, that licenses you to run Windows Server and applications in up to 4 operating system environments. So that might be 1 physical and 3 virtual, or again it could be 4 virtual operating system environments. If you are using all 4 environments and running applications in them, then again you are allowed to run Windows Server on the physical machine to manage those 4 virtual computers. If you go for the Data Center Edition, then that licenses you for an unlimited number of virtual machines. So you are allowed to run Windows Server in the physical machine and an unlimited number of virtual machines. Do please remember here that the licensing is just for Windows Server, so wherever you are running an application, you would need to have the appropriate license there too. So far we've really just been thinking about one physical server, and on this physical server we do have 4 virtual machines running. So we would license that server with the Enterprise edition of Windows Server to make sure that it is covered for those 4 virtual machines. Now let's just pop those virtual machines into that server and introduce 2 more physical servers. One thing that it's likely that you would want to do here is to move those virtual machines around for the purposes of load balancing, so that in an organisation you don't have one server that's running at very high capacity and other servers that are hardly working at all. And it is absolutely fine to move your virtual machines around, as long as they land on a server with a license attached to it. So we're going to introduce 2 more Enterprise Edition licenses and assign those licenses to servers. One thing I want to point out here is that server licenses are tied to that server. So with a Windows Server license, it is effectively glued to the server and you can only reassign that license every 90 days. as opposed to the virtual machines which are freely move aroundable within those licensed servers. So now we can see here that we can move those virtual machines around, and as they are all landing on a licensed server, everything's great. Okay, so let's introduce a couple more virtual machines. So we now have 6 virtual machines in total. Again, they would be moving around for the purposes of load balancing. But what happens if we hit a situation where all 6 virtual machines end up on the same server? That server is now not licensed properly because it's only covered with the Enterprise Edition that only licenses us for up to 4 virtual machines on that server. What could we do? Well, I suppose we could purchase another Enterprise Edition license, assign it to that server, and that would cover us for now our 6 virtual machines that we have here. But we would have to do that with every server. Alternatively, it would be better to go for the Data Center Edition, to cover that server with the Data Center Edition, and then it is licensed for an unlimited number of virtual machines. But again, considering the fact that those virtual machines could land on the other 2 servers as well, we do then need to make sure that they are also both covered with a data center license. The last area I want to cover with Windows Server is that of downgrade rights. Now, you're probably aware when you purchase through volume licensing that you are allowed to run earlier versions of the software. So if you've bought your Windows Server 2008 through volume licensing, you can happily run Windows Server 2003 on that server if you want to. The thing I want to concentrate on here really is Downgrading Editions. We've covered this server with the Enterprise Edition of Windows Server, and that does mean that we are licensed to run either the Enterprise or Standard editions of Windows Server in the physical or virtual operating system environments. If we had purchased the Data Center Edition, that would mean we were able to run Data Center, Enterprise or Standard editions. We're finished now with the area of server virtualization, so we are going to move now into desktop virtualization. And the first area that we're going to look at here is virtualizing the Windows desktop. So what I mean here is virtualizing both the operating system and applications for users to access. The area we're going to focus on is server-based computing, and this is where you would have the desktop, so again the operating system and applications, stored on a server, and the users connect to that server to run their particular desktop. And there are 2 technologies available to do this. There's remote desktop services, or what used to be known as terminal services, and there's the virtual desktop infrastructure. We'll have a look at remote desktop services first, and then we'll move on to VDI. With RDS, the desktop that the users connect to is stored on the server, and obviously with the desktop we're talking here the operating system, the applications and the data. The users would then connect to that desktop, use a desktop, and the resulting desktop image would be presented back to the device that they're working on. And we can see here there's a variety of devices that can be used. Users could be working over on the left hand side with a PC or maybe a thin client, and over on the right hand side with legacy hardware. Now, when you think that the desktop image is stored on the server, there are some pros and cons to this. On the plus side, this is a highly manageable and secure setup. IT can control precisely who has access to that desktop, they can keep the desktop updated, and they can ensure that all the data is residing within the corporate environment and not going outside of that firewall. I suppose on the downside you do have to have a network connection constantly to be able to work with RDS, and it is just one flavour of desktop suiting everybody. So that's great if it is a case of one flavour suits all, but if you do have certain users that need to have different logon rights, you might have users that need to log on as administrators and some just as users, that's not so easy through RDS. And if you have users that need to be able to highly customise that desktop, again, this isn't the great solution for that. Now, when it comes to licensing RDS, this is a technology that is provisioned through Windows Server. So on that server we would need to have a Windows Server license, and we would have needed to have activated the RDS technologies, so said we're going to use that. Our users and devices do then need to have CALs. So over on the left hand side we would purchase a Windows Server user CAL for those users because they're using multiple devices. And over on the right hand side we've purchased Windows Server device CALs because we have one computer being used by many people. That then licenses the people to access Windows Server, but they do then need an extra CAL, and that would be the RDS CAL, and that licenses them to use the RDS technology. And again, you can see they come in user or device varieties. If you have external users, and if you remember, external users are non-employees of your organisation that you want to access the services of your server, you could also purchase them CALs in either user or device variety, and again they would need both a Windows Server CAL and an RDS CAL. Or if there is a large quantity of external users, you might choose to go down the external connector route and purchase external connectors. And in this situation you would need to purchase both a Windows Server external connector and an RDS external connector. We've talked about RDS then, which gives us a way of provisioning a standard desktop image out to all of our users. The alternative way of provisioning a desktop image is using the Virtual Desktop Infrastructure, or VDI. Now with this setup you would hold on your server a desktop image per user. And when the users come in and log on in the morning, again on a PC or a thin client, they would get their own desktop image sent down to the device that they are working on. This means that those desktop images can be completely customized images with the applications and the settings that each individual user needs. Now you obviously do need to have a good infrastructure in place for this to work. You need a reasonable amount of storage space to hold all of those desktop images, but the technology to do this is literally just again Windows Server. So we know that Windows Server includes Hyper-V, and Hyper-V is there to host those desktop images, and it also includes RDS, and in this case RDS would act as the connection broker, so the thing that sends the desktop image from the server down onto that client device. The RDS connection broker is great for small VDI deployments. If you were doing a large VDI deployment, you would probably want to go out to one of our partners and use something like Zen Desktop. So let's think about how this is all licensed then. So we know that Windows Server is provisioning out the VDI sort of technologies, so that server would need to be covered with a Windows Server license. And then all of our users would need a Windows Server CAL and an RDS CAL because they are accessing that Windows Server which is using RDS. But what other licenses do they need? Well, that depends a little bit on what is running on the client device. So over on the top left hand corner we have a device there with Windows 7 with software assurance. Now this user doesn't actually need any more licenses for the VDI setup because the software assurance now for Windows 7 includes the rights to store your desktop on your client device or on a server and then provision that desktop down to the client machine. So we have improved the SA rights to suit the VDI sort of setup. Bottom left hand corner we have our Windows 7 device without software assurance. So for that device we would need an extra VDA license, which is the Virtual Desktop Access license. This is a subscription license that basically gives us the rights to store that desktop again either on the client machine or on the server, and it gives us the rights then to download that desktop from the server onto the client machine. The same would be true over on the right hand side where we have our thin clients. They again would need that VDA license to license them for Windows 7 stored over on the server and again being virtualized down onto the desktop machine. Now what I want to do here is focus just a little bit more on some of these rights. So let's think over on the left hand side first of all about software assurance. I've already mentioned that we have improved the SA benefits, and if you have got Windows 7 covered with software assurance, that does mean that you can now deploy your desktop either on the local client machine or on a server and virtualize it down onto that client device. It does also give extended roaming rights, and this means that with VDI, yes, you would want your desktop virtualized down onto your work computer, but if you were working at home or at a friend's house or in an internet cafe, you might also want your desktop virtualized down onto those machines. So the extended roaming rights give you the rights to access your desktop from your work computer or any other non-corporate device. Office 2010 software assurance also now contains those extended roaming rights as well. So if that desktop image that you were provisioning out through VDI included a copy of Office, it would obviously have to have that Office license, and if the Office is covered with SA, that does mean that you would be licensed to access that image with Office from any computer, so your main work computer and any other non-corporate device. For the machines that did not have software assurance, or maybe they were thin clients and they have purchased the VDA license, the VDA license is a subscription license, so you would subscribe to that through your volume licensing agreement, and that licenses you effectively for Windows 7 with full software assurance benefits, so you would get the same SA benefits as you would have got if you had purchased Windows 7 with SA. And again, that obviously then gives you the extended roaming rights so that you can access that desktop image from both the thin client that you were using or the PC without software assurance that you were using and any other non-corporate device. When working with VDI, it is very important to think about the whole management side of things and ensure that the servers that are hosting your desktop images are managed properly so that they don't fail. And if you're putting out VDI, it is absolutely fine to go through and purchase standalone the licenses that you would require for that VDI sort of infrastructure. To make life easier, Microsoft does have 2 VDI suites, which are really ready-made suites for customers to buy the technology that they need to support their VDI infrastructure. And those suites come in 2 flavours, the standard and premium suite. Now, if we look at both suites, they do both include MDOP, which is something I'll talk about a little more later in this presentation. But I just want you to be aware that it is possible to purchase them without MDOP, just in case a customer already has that MDOP subscription. The standard suite then includes licenses for RDS, but that is RDS literally to support VDI, so that's restricted use rights RDS, and it's really there just to act as the connection broker to send the desktop from the server onto the client machines. It then includes some System Center licensing, and if you remember, our System Center products are our management products, and it includes the licenses for Configuration Manager, Operations Manager and Virtual Machine Manager, which are the technologies that we would really need to support our VDI infrastructure. The premium suite is really the same as the standard suite, but with full use RDS. So that is giving us the licensing to use RDS for a VDI setup, but also to use the other RDS technologies, such as application virtualization for RDS, which again I will talk to you about. The VDI suites are again our subscription licensing, and the price is shown here just to give you an idea of the annual price per device for VDI. But let's just show you graphically how the VDI suites really work. So here we have a server hosting our desktop images per user, and those users would come in and have that image sent down onto the device that they are working on. And we know on that server that we have got Windows Server running there with Hyper-V and RDS. If we license all of those end devices with their Windows 7 with software assurance or a VDA license, and then one of the virtual desktop infrastructure suites, so you will see those suites are licensed per device, that then allows you, by having the VDI suite, to have another server in the organisation running those System Center products. But it is restricted use rights with the System Center products, so they are literally there to support the servers that are running the VDI setup. So for instance, if you had an Exchange server running in the organisation that you wanted to manage, you would not be able to do that with the System Center licenses purchased through the Vdi Suites. You would have to license that separately. We've finished now talking about virtualizing the whole desktop, so now we're going to move into virtualizing just the desktop applications. Again, we'll take a look at the technologies that provision this, and then we will look at how they're licensed. So first of all, we need to come back again to RDS. Now, when we talked about RDS before, we were talking about provisioning the whole desktop through RDS, so that was the operating system and the applications. What we're thinking about now is just provisioning an application through RDS. So let's say, for instance, that we want our users to work with Office 2010, but maybe over on the left-hand side of the screen, we've got users who are using thin clients. Over on the right-hand side, we've got users working with legacy hardware, and they're working with devices that are not capable of having Office 2010 installed on them. So what do? Well, we put Office 2010 onto the server, and again those users would connect to that server and run the applications from the server. So Word or Excel would be processing on the server, the resulting screen image would be presented back to the devices that they are working on. This is licensed in exactly the same way that delivering the whole desktop was through RDS. Now, the next technology to think about is application virtualization using Microsoft AppV. And this is a great technology to solve application to application compatibility issues. So if you have two applications that you need to run at the same time on your computer, but for whatever reason they are not capable of being run on the same time on your computer, then you would use AppV. So how does it work? Well, IT would decide what applications they want to provision using AppV, and they would sequence those applications up onto a server. When those applications are sequenced up, they are placed in a sandbox, and that sandbox contains all of the components that the application needs to run. So really it's a self-contained unit, meaning the application doesn't need to go out of that sandbox and therefore won't conflict with anything else. The users would come in the morning and they would click on the icon of the application that they want to run, so let's say Word for instance, and that application would be streamed down onto their device. And again, it's streamed down in its sandbox, so it's running in a completely self-contained unit. When it is streamed down, it's quite intelligent on how it streams. It would send the shell of the application first of all, so that you can very quickly start using the application, and then would send down the functionality in the order that you're using it. So if you were using Word tables, for instance, it would send down the tables functionality initially. Now, because those applications sit in their sandboxes on the client machines working away, they won't conflict with any other applications. And at the end of the day, when you log off, IT can control how long that application resides on that device. So it might be that you log off and the application is wiped and the next morning would be streamed down again. Or it might be set to remain on that device for a period of time, meaning that you don't have to log on to the network every single day to access that particular application. Another lovely feature about this is the whole manageability side of things. You can imagine the application that is being held up on the server. If it needs an update, for instance, if a new service pack comes out, IT only need to resequence the application with the new service pack onto the server. The next morning when the end users stream that application down, it would be the updated application that gets sent down to them. Moving on from AppV, what we want to think about now is AppV for RDS. So imagine that we are provisioning out some applications through RDS, and we have our 3 servers here running those applications. 2 of those applications are lovely friendly orange applications, and one at the moment is a horrible green application that is clashing with the other 2 orange ones. So currently we have 3 physical servers, and we would have our end users connecting to those servers through RDS to run those applications. Now what we want to do here really is reduce the number of physical servers that we have. So obviously we could bring in some virtualization, and we could have one physical server running two virtual servers with the lovely orange applications running on one server, but at the moment that horrible green application would still need to be on a separate virtual RDS server. If we bring in AppV for RDS, what it would allow us to have is one server, be that physical or virtual, with all of the applications that we want to provision through RDS sandboxed. So in other words, meaning that that green application is now no longer going to clash with the orange applications. They can all be hosted on the one RDS server, and the end users can connect to those applications and run them. Now our next technology to look at is MedV, and I think what we've got to appreciate here is when we were talking about AppV, we were talking about application to application compatibility issues, and AppV would solve that. MedV is there to solve application to operating system compatibility issues, and MedV stands for the Microsoft Enterprise Desktop Virtualization. So imagine that we have a computer running Windows 7 and we have some applications we need to put on that will only run on XP. We would use Virtual PC, which is a freely downloadable piece of software, to create a virtual XP machine on our Windows 7 computer. Now if we left it like that, it wouldn't be a very manageable and a very nice experience for the end users. You know, if you have literally two virtual machines running, you end up with two start buttons, two taskbars, two My Documents, and for the end user that's not great. So bring in MedV. It gives IT the manageability that they need so that they can manage that virtual image, the XP image, as well as the physical Windows 7 image. But also it gives a seamless experience for the end user because it integrates that XP machine into their Windows 7 desktop. So when they want to run an application, they would just click on the start button as usual, the application is displayed to them, they would click on the icon and the application would run. And it would appear no different to them as if they were running an application that was in their host operating system. And you can see from here the two applications that are running in the XP virtual machine are the ones with the little sort of red border around them. Finally, we need to think about how AppV and MedV are licensed. And AppV and MedV are two of the 6 components that make up MDOP, the Microsoft Desktop Optimization Pack. So customers who have software assurance on their Windows client, so in other words Windows 7 covered with SA, are allowed to subscribe to MDOP and put those MDOP tools on their computer and use them. So the MDOP license is a subscription license and you would just purchase that through your volume licensing agreement. I think some key facts to remember are that any applications that are being virtualized using these tools do still need to be licensed by device. So if you are provisioning Office through AppV, those client machines that are running Office would still need to have an Office license. The other AppV technology we talked about was AppV for RDS, and that licensing is just covered by the normal RDS licensing, so in other words an RDS CAL, and don't forget you would need the underlying Windows Server CAL as well. As we draw this presentation to a close, let's take a moment to review what we've covered. After a quick introduction on the different areas of Microsoft Virtualization, we've moved on to cover the virtualization and licensing of Windows Server, of the Windows Desktop and the desktop applications. That concludes this presentation. I hope you've enjoyed listening to it and I wish you the very best of luck when taking the associated assessment. Goodbye.